Sure. Okay. Can everyone hear okay?
Yeah. Yep.
All good. Okay. So, very brief introduction to computer using agents and how I think that they are going to transform identity attacks going into the future. So, why are we talking about this? We're focused on stopping identity attacks. Um, my job as in R&D is to look into how this is evolving. So, when computer using agents came out, or first announced rather, I thought, how is this going to impact automation of identity attacks? Could it impact that going forwards? So, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of very basic identity attacks here. These form part of the SaaS attacks matrix overall. This is something I released about getting close to 2 years ago now. It's open source on GitHub. It was inspired by the MITRE attack framework, but it's focused purely on identity and SaaS-based attacks. So if you want to look more into this afterwards, check this out. It's kind of become the de facto resource for this now. But we're just going to pick a few on here, some of the more simple recon and initial access kind of based methods to use for this demonstration. So we'll focus on stolen credentials here. The idea being basic identity attacks for like enumerating cloud identities on different SaaS applications and using stolen credentials to gain access to them. So we're going to look briefly about stolen credentials in general. So basically, even at this point in time, 80% of attacks now involve identity and compromised credentials. There's literally billions of credentials available online. You can buy them, from the dark web for as little as $10. But on average, as organizations, we're spending a lot more than that per user on security. So, I guess what's gone wrong? And despite this investment, essentially identity breaches are rising. So we're going to look at why and how that may accelerate further. So I kind of pivoted from the sort of more traditional endpoint security space to the identity world. Probably kind of near the beginning of this graph. It was like kind of beginning of 2022, really. At that point in time, I think the pivot and the shift had only really just happened. And in terms of public breaches, we were only just starting to see a few come through. However, that's really rapidly accelerated now. Even in terms of public breaches, we've seen a massive increase in number and the severity of them, including even people like Okta and Microsoft identity providers themselves being compromised. But particularly, it probably all came to a head last year with the Snowflake account breaches, a very simple identity attack. But it affected a huge number of customers, a huge amount of data. It's been billed as one of the biggest cyber breaches in history, and it was a very simple identity attack. So already these things are effectively making big headways now. There's a lot of identity attacks going on. But what we're going to concern ourselves here is with the automation side of it and how the introduction of computer using agents going forward might impact this. So why has this changed in the first place? And it's really because identity's become the new perimeter, really. So if you think back to, forgive my extremely simplified network diagrams here, but really, if you think back, say, 15 years, kind of the early end of the beginning of the kind of endpoint breach era, moving from the network breach era into endpoint breaches, what did networks look like in your typical org? It was something like this, right? It was an internal network with servers and laptops and desktops, and then there'd be a DMZ for an application server, and maybe a webmail server and a VPN concentrator. We probably didn't have many fully remote users back then, but we'd call them roaming users, people on the move. They'd connect into the VPN concentrator or the webmail server from the outside. And attacks were either looking to circumvent the firewall if it was a traditional network-oriented attack, or they'd be compromising an endpoint that would then communicate outbound to a command and control server. But that's not really what IT infrastructure looks like now. It looks a lot more like this. So we end up just having endpoints connecting directly to lots of different SaaS apps. Sometimes that's via an identity provider. Sometimes it's without one and it's just direct connections. And then identity attacks that are happening are either kind of targeting the user's browser or they're directly targeting cloud identities on different SaaS apps. So for most older organizations, both of these sides of the graph, of the diagram rather, effectively coexist now. And we see this gradual left to right shift. And then for newer organizations, in many cases, actually only the right side of this exists. So Push is an example of this. We were founded as a fully remote cloud native startup originally, so we've never built traditional on-site infrastructure or offices in that sense. We are fully on the right side. So this has essentially created a huge new attack surface at the same time that we've gradually got better at dealing with endpoint attacks, and that's what's really kind of driven the initial shift. The interesting thing is if we think something as simple as just stolen credentials, that's the only type of kind of credential like identity attack we're going to look at in the small time we've got today. In a way, it's actually harder to use them now than it used to be. Normally, we say attacks only get better, right? But this is one case where traditionally, actually, certain aspects of attacks have not got better. It used to be that when we were targeting traditional networks, everything used standard protocols, right? So you could automate things very easily. Someone only had to write a DNS enumeration tool once, a port scanner tool once, a password guesser once, and you could automate everything, can brute force things across the entire internet easily. Once we move to the sort of very SaaS-based age, we've got this point where, okay, everything might be standard in terms of HTTP, HTTPS, that kind of stuff. But each app itself is a custom graphically driven interface. Each API is custom with different functions. And not only that, but sites are specifically built to prevent automation sometimes. We've built the whole concept of captures and other sort of robot detection features. So it's really not easy to automate things across lots of apps in the same way that it was scanning the internet for open FTP servers and brute forcing passwords before. We kind of have to like repeat that automation for every app we want to target, and then things change as well. So what we're going to look at really is effectively how computer using agents are going to change that. Now, this is very early days. Operator is the only main one available. It's not even in V1. It's a research preview at the moment. But obviously, this is a space that's been moving so rapidly in the last couple of years. We can expect very rapid changes in this new iteration of tools in the next year or so too. So I'm trying to look forward to see how this is going to impact things. So ultimately, the main change with Operator computer using agents is that rather than be a kind of self-contained LLM that we have questions and answers for, it can actually drive a web browser like a human, which means we can open it up to automating so many more tasks. And obviously it's intended to be for, productivity tasks, but the question mark is, could that impact cyber attacks as well? So if we're looking at a non-cyber task, like what it's intended for, think of it as like having a virtual personal assistant. You could say, look, I want to do a tour of Rome, go find me the highest rated thing on TripAdvisor. It can drive a browser, go to TripAdvisor, browse TripAdvisor just like a human would, find some reviews, and then actually go and book the trip. It can do a lot more automation that we're not used to previously. So how would this happen for identity attacks? So I'm just going to look at one really kind of simple example here and think about just the first two parts of the cyber kill chain as they relate to identity attacks now. First of all, we've got the recon side. We need to understand what apps are companies using, what cloud identities are valid, what login methods are possible, that sort of thing. It's very different to the sort of port scanning era. We're not looking for open ports and scanning for that. We're looking to identify valid apps in use, valid cloud tenants, valid login methods, etc. Then on the initial access side, we're just going to be looking at simple credential stuffing here. But the idea is rather than the times of old where we had one VPN concentrator and one webmail server to try creds against, we've now got, say, 40,000 SaaS apps to try them against and see where they might have been reused. So the question we're asking is just like, we've got these creds, we've stolen them with an info stealer or with a credential harvesting phishing attack. Are they valid elsewhere? Can we log in without further checks? That's essentially what we're looking to achieve. So I just want to show you really how Operator works in this space, give a little flavor of what this is looking like now. I've started with just one app I picked as a random example, Bamboo HR. It happens to be an app that we use in Push. In this case, it has the concept of separate tenants, which is a common feature in many different SaaS apps. They all handle it differently, but this one has sort of name-based tenants. So much like you pick a domain name, you pick a tenant name when you are creating a tenant for Bamboo HR. So we use it, and I wanted to see, with very simple instruction, would Operator be able to identify our tenant automatically and what the login methods available were. So as you can see, I've given it really simple instructions, and here we go. You can see it operating. It does literally behave like a user. It's Googling for these things. It's found the Bamboo login link, and it's now going to try an obvious tenant name for security, and it's going to, that happens to be the one we've picked. It's found that that's redirected to a Google SSO page in this case. And then it's concluded, yes, push security uses Bamboo HR, requires SSO via Google accounts for login, which is exactly how we've got it set up. That's correct. Now, obviously, I can do that quicker than operator can. I don't need it to do these individual tasks. The point is that this changes the game because it can do something with very generic instructions on anything. So yes, on a one-to-one basis, it's not doing anything I can't do myself. But the point is the idea of parallelizing this. I could get this to do it for 40,000 unfamiliar apps. And do it for me then. And that's where I think the change we're going to see that's coming is here. So for example, I picked just us there, but if I move on and I said, okay, tell me some more customers of Bamboo. And for example, on their website, they've got some customer stories. So I said, go find some other customers of Bamboo and do the same. And it went and browsed Bamboo's website, found some names of some known customers, and it tried some of those out and then came back with this table and said, okay, yeah, I've guessed some more tenant names. I've got all these companies here, and these are the different login methods that I identified. So you can see some of them have set it up with SSO for Okta or Google or Microsoft or local only. In some cases, they allow both an SSO mechanism and a local login. And you can see how it pulled this back. And it's really simple generic instructions it's used to do this. So that's the recon side. I'm just going to show you quickly what it looks like for the more juicy side of credential stuffing. So let's say the same thing. We've stolen a password with an info stealer or something. I'll just give a few apps to try here and say, hey, I want you to go and try these credentials against some apps and tell me where they're valid. And we'll see that it's able to do this in a pretty good way as well without any further instructions. So like it started out with Microsoft, and in many cases, maybe that's where we fished the credentials in the first place, or it may be the saved password that we stole with an info stealer. And in this case, it's going to find that the credentials are valid, but in this case, I've configured MFA, so there's actually a strong security key associated with that account. So obviously can't log in directly. We can see that it's observed that though. It's now moving on. It's going to Atlassian. And you can see how human it is in terms of how it's working. And at this point, I can deliberately configure another slightly different situation where actually I've linked this to a Google account. So you can't log in with a username and password. In fact, you have to SSO with a Google account instead for the same email address. So it's identified that. It's now moving on. Now it's going to Shortcut. Shortcut, if you're not familiar, it's a little bit like Jira. It's a ticketing system. It's just another random example I picked because it's an app we use. In this case, it's going to go and find the login page for Shortcut, and it's going to be able to try to log in with an actual username and password directly again. And in this case, it's going to find that I've configured this. So this was a single factor account, and it's been able to log in quickly and confirm this.
Good evening.
So,
hey,
the noise from one channel. Okay, so in this case, basically, we can see how it's correctly summarized these findings, okay? It found that the Microsoft password was accepted, but there was a prompt for a security key. For Atlassian, it's been able to correctly identify that the account existed, but it was tied to a Google account. And for Shortcut, it found the password was accepted and the login was successful. The other two I didn't show, I was kind of skipped ahead and didn't show, but it's a similar thing in Uclino. It found it logged in directly, and that worked as well. And for Dropbox, it could tell that the account didn't even exist because the email wasn't recognized. So really, you can see how simple this is, and how useful this could be for automation going forwards. It's really going to potentially change a lot with identity attacks, where they've actually been quite difficult to automate at scale across lots of different apps. And this may change this. It's almost like could be the next generation of script kiddies, but using, computer using agents. So like an interesting point to think back now is like, what if CUAs existed in 2024 when the Snowflake breaches happened? in this case, attackers found some credentials that were valid for Snowflake. They then also tried other sets of credentials they had against Snowflake, and would then, once they realized it was a very valuable source of information and really targeted that app specifically. But in future, it may be that we can just much more easily try creds when we get them against 40,000 different apps and see what drops out every single time. So, for example, from our own data, we find 1 in 3 employees reuse passwords in general. That includes their identity provider credentials they will use with other apps. So I guess the question mark is in future, what if Snowflake hadn't ended up with just Snowflake? What if it'd been 10 Snowflakes at once? That's what we could be looking at into the future once computer using agents become more normalized, less restrictions, easier to scale, etc. I think this is going to radically change the ability to automate identity attacks and scale them. So yeah, that's really the summary of the talk. It's just a quick window into what might come, how we may see a dramatic impact on identity attacks in the future as computer using agents develop. And ultimately, in a lot of the cases, the vulnerabilities already exist for many organizations here. They're just waiting to be found and exploited. So it's well worth thinking about finding a fix in these ahead of time, because the attacks here are only going to get better over time, and they're only going to scale more. So it's well worth familiarizing yourself with modern identity and SaaS attacks and testing your defenses. And that's it. That's all we've got time for. So thank you for listening. Check us out, pushsecurity.com if you're more interested. Check out the SaaS attacks matrix if you're interested in identity attacks in general, and happy to take any questions if there's any time for them. But yeah, otherwise, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Luke.